Welcome back to Not So Grand Garage. As you can see, we're out in the shop, and it's kind of late, but we're out here working on this little issue we ran into. I talked about it a little bit on the re-gear video on the flatbed, and that is this caliper mount issue we've got. Now, as you can see, someone did me a big favor by taking a grinder to these brackets. These are cast caliper mounts, and as you can see, they've started to crack through here. Now the caliper actually sits in place and rubber pins get hammered in. That's all that holds the caliper on the truck. So if these fail through here, which they're already starting to crack, the caliper can easily come off, which on a truck this size, well, any vehicle really, that would make for a bad day. So I've kind of been banging my head against the wall trying to figure out what we were going to do, and I think we've got it worked out. So let's get started. So after a lot of digging, a lot of research online, trying to figure out the best route to take, I found all different kinds of bolt-on caliper mounts, switching to GM calipers, GM rotors, which that adds cost as far as the rotors are concerned, because I just put rotors on this thing a couple years ago. They're in great shape. There's no real need to replace them. But that's when I came across RuffStuff Specialties. Got some goodies down here from them. But they've got a caliper mount setup that uses a GM bolt-on caliper, but retains the stock Ford rotor, which I like. Hey, it saves a lot of money. And the GM calipers are cheap. Now, these are nice 3/8 thick stamped steel brackets. They bolt directly onto the knuckle and come with a spacer, and then your spindle bolts on over that, and you can run a GM caliper. Now the standard caliper they suggest, if you do the math on it, the piston size in that caliper actually comes out to a little smaller area than the factory 2-piston calipers that Ford uses. So we're using a larger GM caliper. I'll leave part numbers and links to all this stuff in the video description. But with this larger caliper, I still use the same bolt pattern. It's a bigger option for heavier trucks from the same year range. It is, again, still a bolt-on caliper, but a much larger piston, and that actually gives us a little bit more piston area than the factory calipers. So it's going to be a little bit of an upgrade as far as brake power is concerned, and it was substantially cheaper. I mean, these calipers are dirt cheap, and pretty well every part store has them in stock. So that's the route we're going to try and take. Now, I've already got the axle shafts back in. I did, just to give us a little bit more room, I knocked the casting, just basically polished the casting marks off the backside of the knuckle right here. That is where the big bore of the piston and that caliper rides right next to, so I wanted to just make sure we had plenty of room. And I've gone on and put a little paint on where these bolt up. Nothing, just sprayed a little bit on there, nothing fancy. I also took my my carbide burr and ran it around the inside of these holes on both the spacer and the brackets. I also took the time to clean up the spindle a little bit. Both of them had some chisel marks and everything else on them from previous owners trying to knock them out of place. I knocked those rough or those high spots down and cleaned everything up. So it should all bolt together nicely and we shouldn't have any issues. But yeah, the as far as just, you know, cleanup fitment goes, that's kind of stuff's to be expected. But with setups like this. But we're going to get started and see how it goes. So for starters, the previous owner also did me a solid by beating the ever-loving snot out of the end of this axle shaft. And yeah, I've been sitting here with a hand file and my handy grinder reshaping the end of this axle shaft. So hopefully I can get our new lockout hubs put on, which I've got us real close. I think I can get it on there now. I may have a little bit more work to do on the back side of the splines, but that's not a big deal. But getting real close to being able to start putting this thing back together. So I'm gonna finish knocking this out, get that hub to slide on there nice, and then we will get these brakes worked out. So we are ready to start assembling our new brake setup. So this here, slide over, back. I'm going to position the caliper to the very back side of the knuckle. That should give us the most clearance right through here. So the caliper bracket goes on first, and then flip it around. These are directional. The spacer goes on. Then up next is the spindle, which I've already cleaned up. I'm going to repack this inner spindle bearing, which is what supports this the outer axle shaft right here. I'll repack that real quick, slide it up into place, and everything should fit pretty nice. Got the spindle bolted back on, torque to spec, little red Loctite on the bolts, and bracket fits nice. As you can see back here, this is where I clearanced everything. And all I did, like I said, was just clean up the casting, basically. Just take the casting marks off of it, off the knuckle. And yeah, I'm not putting on the dust shields because they do not fit around these brackets. But that's okay, I'm not too worried about that. Next up, I need to go on and pull these wheel bearings out of the hubs, clean them up. Gonna go on and knock new seals in the back after repacking these bearings, get everything set up on here, and then we will see how well the GM caliper fits this setup. Got the inner bearing repacked, new seal in place. I'm going to flip it over. Got the outer bearing cleaned up, and gonna go on and pack it. We'll get the hub slid in place and get the spindle nut on there hand tight anyways to get us started. Then we'll set the wheel bearings and go from there. Got our hub and rotor back on, outer bearing re-greased, torque to spec. So how I do these, torque that inner bearing or the inner nut, torque it down 50-65 foot-pounds, something along those lines, while spinning the hub like so. That's going to seat that bearing or those bearings. Then you're going to back that that inner nut off a quarter turn approximately, and that's it. Then slide your lock in place. There'll be a little pin that engages, kind of hard to see in there, so I'm not going to try and show you, but you'll know what I'm talking about when you see it. You're going to turn the inner nut to get it to line up with the closest hole in the lock washer, and then put on your outer nut, torque it to 50-60 foot-pounds, somewhere along those lines, and you're good. But everything's in, good to go there. And as far as clearance goes on our brackets, everything looks good. A little more than 1/16 of an inch, I'd say, between the back of the rotor and the bracket. So yeah, looks good to me. Now we are going to, just to test fit, set our monster single piston JB6 GM caliper up in place and see how it works. Now, this is something, even beforehand, this is something I wanted to explore because I never really liked the little rubber cushion drive-in pin caliper attachment. I always wanted to switch out to a bolt-on style caliper, just didn't know how I was going to do it and maintain good braking. So we're going to see how this fits, make sure we don't need to clearance the caliper anymore. There's a little tab right here sticking up on the caliper that may interfere with the back of the knuckle. We'll see, but I'm gonna slide it up in place and see how it looks without the pads on it, And yeah, because I need to clean this rotor off. It's kind of grubby. But yeah, see how it fits and go from there. Here we have it. Fitment looks really nice. We don't have anything dragging on the rotor. Looks to be rotor centered in the caliper, which is what we want. The only thing I may have to address, which I kind of figured I would, is back in here, it's barely touching on the inner part of the knuckle there, on the outer part of the caliper. So I'm gonna hit that with either the carbide burr or something like that, or a flapper wheel. Just open that up just a little bit. Don't remove a bunch of material. There's no point in it. But just give us a little bit of clearance there. That way, as the caliper moves back and forth, which it doesn't move a whole lot, but as the caliper moves, it won't bind up on the knuckle. So yeah, overall, I'm pretty happy with how these fit. Again, I knew going into this, it was not going to be a bolt-on affair. But yeah, so we've got a few little tweaks to make, but I think this is going to be a solid option for us, and make getting this thing back on the road and much safer to stop. I did go on and pick up GM brake hoses, which they run the correct size line as far as the factory forward lines will fit. But as you can tell, the factory forward line has a T right here. So I'm gonna have to do some work there. I got a brake T, and I'm gonna bend up a line for that. That won't be a big deal. So there's some little adjustments to make, but not a big deal. And yeah, I think this is gonna work out really well. So I'm gonna go on and pull this caliper back off, go on and finish up the outside of this, see if I can get our new lockouts put on, which I've had these sitting on the shelf for 3 years or so, because this axle shaft I knew was damaged quite some time ago when I repacked the wheel bearings on this thing the first time, and I got it all apart, and I just left the inner part of the lockout out of the truck, which it hasn't had a front drive shaft in it that long either, so didn't really make any difference. None of this stuff up here was spinning. So axle shafts, all that stuff has been stationary this whole time. So now that I was able to track down, so these are old Ramsey brand locking hubs, we're going to install them, and hopefully we'll have this thing four-wheel drive again here real soon. Once I get that done and get the rotor cleaned up, I'll bring it back. I'll show you how much material I remove from the knuckle, and we'll have a set of brake pads in it and check out the fitment. But yeah, really happy with this. Like I said, I'll leave links to everything I've bought for this swap in the video description. I think if you're wanting to get rid of the rubber isolators, so far this looks like a great option. RuffStuff Specialties really really helped us out and got us out of a bind on this one, and it may even increase our braking, since the piston surface area is a little bit bigger than the twin piston calipers we're taking off. But yeah, I'll get this wrapped up and get everything cleaned up, and we'll take a look at it after we get it all together. So a little bit of polishing on the knuckle has opened up our gap right there, just a smidge, to where we don't have to worry about the caliper binding on the knuckle. So should be good there. I'm gonna go on and clean everything up. I'm gonna pull the caliper back off, paint the rotor, the hub, paint the knuckle, and get the caliper and pads on for the final time. But so far, I'm really happy with how this is turning out. So for my setup, I'm gonna be running the GM JB7 calipers, which they run a slightly bigger piston than the JB6s. The JB7s, based on piston area, actually have a little bit more area than the factory two-piston calipers we're taking off. But yeah, we'll go over some numbers on actual sizing and brake force and everything else. But these brackets were designed for JB6 calipers. So I've ran into a couple little bugs there, but nothing too bad. But I'm gonna go on and get the pads put in this, which I'll be using JB6 pads. Reason being, is because if we compare these side by side, you'll notice that the JB6 pad has this notch cut out down here, where this just has the pad material wedged off. That notch clears our caliper brackets, where this not having that notch does not. So yeah, not a huge deal. So we're gonna have a slight increase in pressure at the caliper, a very slightly smaller pad. So I think it'll come out in the wash as far as brake performance compared to the stock 2-piston setup. But yeah, gonna go on and get it put together and go from there. Got our pads in place. You can see the clip that holds the inner pad into the piston. But got a little bit of grease on everything where the pads slide. I also put a little bit of grease on the backside of this pad where it contacts the caliper, help prevent rattles and squeaks. But I'll also grease the pins where they come through down here. But yeah, gonna go on and get that thrown on. Got a caliper mounted, pads in place, got the pins and all the slide points lubricated. As you can see, I've got the GM line on the back of the caliper, and it will give us plenty of length for this setup. So shouldn't have any issues there. I do have to, when I take this line off, it's got a T built into it, so I'm going to install a T right here to use, and that should get us going. So I've got both sides put together now, and I'm working on the hydraulic end of it. As you can see, if I can find the caliper here, this is the factory setup. There's a T built onto the end of the soft line, so we need to replicate that because the GM lines are not, don't have a T on the end. So what I'm doing here is putting a T in line. I modified the bracket just a little bit, bent it down, which gave us slack in our rubber line, so that's no problem there. Made a short little piece of tube here, right into a brass T, which is an actual brake T, and then the factory line, or the other line, went in on the back side, and now I'm going to remake the line for the master cylinder, come down, tie in right there. Should work out. A little more work, but not a big deal. So there we have it. We got our T put in, new lines ran, everything bled, and everything's pretty well buttoned up. The pedal pressure and everything feels really good. Got a good firm pedal. Pedal height's good, so no issues there. So I'll be really curious to see how this performs out on the road compared to the factory setup. It should be fairly close, and I had mentioned earlier I was going to run over some numbers. So the factory forward pistons in the calipers have an area of approximately 3.73 square inches per piston. So that's 7.46 square inches total between the two. Now with a JB6 caliper, that is roughly 6.89 square inches. So it would be a little bit smaller. And with the JB7s, which is what we're running here, it is 7.79 square inches. So we actually gained a little bit of piston surface area, which will give us a little bit of an advantage as far as pressure at the pad goes. And what that means, say at 1,000 psi brake pressure, you are talking 7,790 pounds of pressure on the pads at 1,000 psi, compared to the Ford setup. The twin piston setup would have been around 7,460 pounds of pressure on the pads. So there's a little bit more pressure there being applied to the friction surface, but the friction surface area is a little bit smaller on these. So yeah, I think overall it's gonna come out in the wash, and they're gonna perform pretty similarly, yeah, if I can talk. But yeah, overall I'm really happy with the fitment and everything. I did end up running the JB6 pads. They fit better with these brackets. The JB7 pads would not clear the bracket because of that not being notched. I don't see that causing issues, but we'll see down the road. The pad, the friction material is the full height of the rotor, so I don't see it causing any trouble. But we'll see as it wears in, and we'll just keep an eye on it. With that said, everything's back together, and I am ready to get the steering linkage put back on, get the front end filled up with oil, get the front tires back on it, and this thing should be able to pull out of the garage under its own power after I clean the bed off. So again, huge shout out to RuffStuff Specialties. They came through on these brake brackets. They work really well. They saved my bacon because I really didn't know what I was going to do. And this worked out really well. Certainly saved me a fair bit of money. I could not find those cast brackets anywhere used. I did find one on eBay, and they wanted almost $500 for one bracket, and I'm not going to pay that. So yeah, this setup worked. We will see how it performs, and I'll give you an update on that once it's out on the road and I get to drive it a little bit. But yeah, links to everything, the bracket kits, the calipers, pads, lines, everything that I've used to do this will be in the video description, so check that out. If you want to support the channel, there will be a link to our website, www.notsograndgarage.com, in the video description as well as a PayPal account that's set up if you want to make a monetary donation. With all that said, if you got any comments, questions, complaints, drop them in the comment section below. I try to answer those as quick as I can. If you would hit that thumbs up button, helps us out quite a bit and doesn't cost you anything. If you haven't already, please subscribe. We appreciate you watching.